So what we're aiming to do is to give you an understanding of what communication is at this moment, to look at the barriers, to look at the challenges, and to give you ideas of how to communicate with your teams and also with furloughed employees. My name's Sharon Baker. I run a leadership consultancy called Fly Don't Walk, and I work with creative agencies because I have a background in creative agencies.
My name is Lucy Thompson. I'm a leadership coach, and I work with senior leaders both one-to-one and with their teams, focusing on team performance and its impact on business performance.
So I suspect you'd agree with me if I say that communicating with clarity has been a challenge in the last few weeks, and I think the government is finding that too. I won't say anything more about that. But it's getting the right message, the right tone, the right timing, the right channels has been really tricky with all the changes that we've been dealing with. And I think people are exhausted at the moment. So effective communication basically means that you can build deeper connection between people. And that then builds trusting relationships. And then people work better together. So you get better collaboration. And then quite often they're happier, so you get more engagement and more motivation. And then basically they do a better job, which leads to higher business performance. Leaders with effective communication skills deliver 47% higher returns over 5 years. That is in normal times. And the yearly cost of misunderstandings in the US and UK is about 30 billion pounds. So that's the biggest 400 companies in the US and UK. Lucy and I thought we'd start by looking at a model of communication, which we've identified 4 main purposes or functions of communication. The first one is informative. Now that's going to be things like informing employees about furloughing schemes, for instance. So it's centered on a concrete outcome. The second is imaginative. So this is about creativity, about ideas, about sharing vision. Probably at the moment about being creative, about pivoting and changing your business model. Influential is about the day-to-day discussion of planning, sharing thoughts and ideas and collaborating with each other. And expressive is really important right now because emotions, I mean, it's fair to say we're on a roller coaster of emotions, most of us. So being able to share and express those right now is really important. So that's the 4th mode of business communication that we've identified. Now, I just want to stay there for a second and just revisit what communication is, because really it's just about talking to each other. It's about our conversations. It's a very human thing. And it's affected by human factors. And I think this is really important to remember when we're dealing with people. And there are also, in the way that we're working, more potential barriers to understanding than there are normally. And to illustrate this, I just want to spend a couple of minutes on the psychology of communication, because this will show how messy it is, basically, and how easy it is to misinterpret. So I want to take you through this. Excuse me for 1 second. So A and B are communicating. So A has an intention, basically, of something, a message they want to communicate. And they will say it with their own communication styles. And this varies hugely. The language that people use, the way they communicate. They'll encode that with their own language, send the message over, and B will receive that and interpret it in their own way, with their own, putting their own meanings on words and all of that. And now, normally, when we communicate, it's a well-known fact, 7% of the communication is through words. 38% is through the tone of our words, our speech, and 55% is in the body language that we use. So right now, with the remote communication that most of us are doing, it's very easy to misinterpret because we've got many less cues than we normally have. And normally, subconsciously, we will clock micro expressions that only take 1/25th of a second, for instance, in another person. So it's very easy to misunderstand. And B also has different processing styles and speeds. So there's a lot that can go on in that whole process. And the last thing I want to mention here is emotion. Again, that when you are communicating something, it's really important to be aware of your own emotions and what you're sending. There's a thing called emotional contagion where people pick up your emotions. So check in with yourself, but also check in with the other person, because at the moment, quite a lot of us are overwhelmed, we're under pressure, there's lots going on, and we may be emotional, and that can really affect and impact how much we can understand and take in and receive. So checking in is hugely important, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail now, because we're going to talk, we're looking at, so if you go on to the next slide, Lucy, please. So we've looked at the what of business communication, and now I want to look at the how. So how do we do this? And we've identified 5 ways that are specifically for now as to how you can communicate clearly now and effectively. So the first one is clear and simple, especially for informative communication, being very clear, very short, very simple to understand statements, and also communicating a lot is important, because as I said before, our brain can only process so much, especially if we're in fight or flight and we're in stress mode. It can only process so much information. So keeping things very clear with clarity and simple. Open and honest. I don't know if you know about the Edelman Trust Barometer, but they said basically that in times of crisis, employees are considered more trustworthy than the CEO. So I think that's quite interesting. And that's because people think the CEO is going to sugarcoat things that they say to employees. So basically the message here is be very transparent, be as honest and open as you can, and then you'll build trust within employees and avoid the rumor mill, basically, because they're all just discussing things between them. Listen is the next one. So research shows that we actually only use 25% of our capability to listen. But right now, with the limited cues that we've got when we're communicating, especially remotely, we have to listen for the feeling and the intention behind what somebody is saying. So it's hugely important. Listening is active, it's not passive. And it's also considered it's a leadership skill, obviously, and to contribute to 40% of your effective leadership is listening. So I think it's hugely important. Clarifying. So clarifying, especially when our communication is compromised in any way, is really important. And this is basically checking back to make sure that you've understood what somebody else has said and that you have been understood. And it's especially important when it's a sensitive conversation, or it's complex, or there's emotion around. So really take note about your that you've both understood each other. And Lucy's going to talk a bit more about how to do that in a minute. And respecting the other. So this is so key in well-being, to really put yourself in their shoes and to think where they are. And especially now when we don't get to walk past somebody's desk to see how they are. Lucy and I, when we chat, always have a check-in to see how we are emotionally and what's going on for us, so that we can then form our communication and our chat in a useful way to each other. So that's the how. And then this is the why. So why are we doing all this, and what does it lead to? It leads to well-being in the workforce. It leads to really engaged and motivated people because they feel supported and heard. And it builds trusting relationships between everybody, which of course then leads to higher business performance. So that's some of the theory behind why communication is so important at the moment. And I'm going to pass on to Lucy now to look at how to apply that and what the challenges are.
So thank you, Sharon. Yes, you have covered the theory, and in a way it's kind of hard for us to kind of think about that as being, well, communication's obvious, isn't it? But actually when you start to unpack it, you realise there's lots of subtleties going on, and perhaps we missed. And so when we think about the theory day to day and our application of that, what is our current reality? I mean, although this week we've seen businesses start to begin to encourage people to come back to their hub workplace, the truth is we've never had to work like this before, have we? Company activity has probably in the last couple of months been focused on trying to make sure that there is actually a business to come back to in 6 months' time, and it's still operationally successful. And that has been the focus of activity. And yet, despite that priority, it's key to ensure that we have a workforce that feels valued and energized and totally on board with the organisation and all that it stands for, despite the craziness of what's going on around us. And so communication, in truth, is at the heart of how we make this happen. A survey a couple of weeks ago by LinkedIn showed us that 47% of UK workers right now feel that their companies are providing well-timed communication to help employees navigate the crisis. That means that 53% don't feel that. And so what are the challenges that are facing us right now that are impacting communication? Well, there's no doubt about it. We have an uncertain and continually evolving external situation, meaning our companies are constantly adapting to changing. The pace at times has been so rapid that the delivery of the new message has not been able to keep pace. And remote working for our employees has meant many hours in front of screens, different perhaps in a very different way to the way that they have been before. And team members aren't having the level of spontaneous catch-up conversations, whether that's about a project or challenges that are going on in your day, or what's going on at home, or the football and the socializing that you've got planned for the weekend. Those just aren't happening in the same way, are they? And this is leading to feelings of disconnection, with a direct impact on our sense of community and belonging in the workplace, because we've got less an ability to normalise the craziness of what's going on in the world, because our connections are so focused on the business when we're on the screen. And so the current situation has led to some employees actively working and being in the virtual workplace, and yet we've got others that are on furlough and not able to work. And the challenge here is this has brought unintended potential tension. And so on a day-to-day basis, we can see that emotions can be much more volatile, and that might not even be anything to do with work. People have been coping not only with working in different environments, but doing it in a far from normal home setup. And so let's go back to that external ring and the what we communicate in our model. In this virtual world that we're operating in, what's aimed at building connection and encouraging and nurturing our relationships with each other? And what is our method for updating and informing of the business priorities and what's hot this week and what are our focuses? And thinking about the way that you perhaps would have all got around the table to be creating and brainstorming a potential project. How do you do that now and draw in ideas from everybody when you're not all together in the same space anymore? And which of our conversations and our communication are just about getting together and having a catch up? There's no real sense of agenda, and it's really focused on just saying hi to each other and hearing the news. And so thinking about what Sharon was sharing with the theory here, I want us to think about the way that we, on a day-to-day basis, put ourselves in the shoes of the other people that we're seeing on the screen in front of us, and those colleagues that we know, perhaps stakeholders that we know less well. How are we checking in with each other as a way of being able to acknowledge and see where each other's at and what's needed today, and being mindful of the other person? We're talking next, the third here, about being patient and compassionate with each other. Actually, we don't really know what's going on in each other's lives at the time that we rock up to the screen. How are we cutting each other some slack and being aware that they might be having a complete nightmare today? Sharon talked earlier about not sugarcoating messages, and I wonder how we are able to be intentional about being upfront and honest about what our needs are, and whether that's within our personal situation or within the work context, and perhaps being able to call out what our needs are. Hang on a minute, there's something going on here. I just need 10 minutes. I'm not fully present to this conversation. And listen. Sharon talked about that being 40% of what we do as leaders. And just now we have to be aware that the cues that we would normally have had are not there. And so how are we using other ways of connecting in with people in our listening to show that we're valuing them, whether that's using their name, whether it's restating perhaps what they have said in order to ensure that they feel heard. And to do that in a way which is really affirming to our colleagues and to our teams. Clarifying and ensuring that we have understanding is about using language which enables us to play back what we think we've just heard. And actually sometimes we just do that without even thinking, because you might be bouncing stuff around with it and go, hang on a minute, can I just check what I think you just said? Is that what you meant? And at this time, there's a real need, I think, to create some sense of positivity and encouragement with each other, and some language around how we can boost each other up and notice what's going well for each other at the moment. So going back to why, doing those things is about ensuring that we're helping effective communication drive towards great business performance. Just want to spend a minute or two thinking about the communication for those that are furloughed. And with the news yesterday that the furlough scheme is going to be extended until October, some organisations may have parts of their teams that could have been out of business for up to 6 months. And so how are we making sure that we're using communication to make sure that those members of our team that are furloughed still feel valued and a central part, so that when the day comes that they are coming back into the team, they're ready to hit the ground running, they feel up to date, they feel engaged, and they know what part they're going to play. Are we considering what well-being provision that we have? And actually for some organisations, it really isn't too late to start thinking about that well-being provision in a different way, particularly now that we know the scheme is going to go on until October. Is there an opportunity to start enabling our furloughed members of the team to be checking in with the wider team on a weekly basis through video, with no intention other than it being getting together and having a bit of a laugh together? And are we considering ways to show and tell them that they're still valued, and perhaps acknowledge that we're missing them? And at a practical level, how are we keeping them informed of business changes? So much is changing, it's happening at a rapid rate, but by the time they come back, there will have been so many different permutations. Actually, being able to be part of that journey may help them land better into the organisation. And so we want to consider the day in the near future, we hope, when our organisations are coming to bringing their teams back together. And I want to consider a couple of things around transparency and support, and being really honest about the fact that sometimes we don't have when they're looking for us as colleagues and leaders for direction. If we don't know something, then the best thing is to just say so. And helping people reintegrate sometimes is about calling out the uncomfortable. So there has been recent differences, and that has brought complexity, and to acknowledge that is to be able to bring collective awareness around it. And we want to be in a place where our teams understand what's expected of them. And as we bring them back together again, how are we going around defining the priorities for each part of the team so that they understand they're part of something bigger? And as part of that, how are we giving the team a voice, each part of the team a voice, so that they're able to contribute and be an active part of moving the team and the business forward? We want to be in a place where we recognise that, yes, the last couple of months have been really difficult, but there have been some silver linings in it. There has been some learnings, and how can we use those learnings to promote optimism and build forward with our collective future? And above it all, we want to be in a place where we're re-establishing trust within the team. All of the above steps can lean towards that and are about establishing new communication channels, reconnecting the team and giving themselves a greater chance of getting back together and doing it fast. So now I want to hand back to Sharon to draw it all together.
I think just basically it's about really getting to the heart of communication and motivating people. We've got to stick together and really move forward in order to build the companies up. Thank you very, very much for coming, and I hope that was useful for you.